And welcome everyone to our midweek Bible class on the scapegoat for us. And it's a bit of a crazy reading, isn't it? I mean, to look at Luke chapter 24 and the two that are on their way to Emmaus. And I can remember. Let's remember together, if you will, the very first time that you read of this story of these two, and they're walking along on their way, and the first thing that pops out is you think, well, they didn't recognize Christ, right? I mean, that's where it comes out. You go, well, they didn't recognize who he was, and of course, their eyes were holden, or they were stopped from recognizing him. They used the ESV, right? And then my first time when I was reading, somebody piped up, well, it's because he appeared in another form, and you get that out of Mark chapter 16 and in verse 12. And the lesson is not that they didn't recognize him. That's not the point of what's going on there. The point is that what comes out is in verse 26. In verse 26, he says, ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? That's the lesson. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them all the scriptures, the things concerning himself. And I was thinking, I want to be one of those two, right? You go, well, first, I don't want to be one of those two. They didn't even recognize Christ when they're walking right beside him. But then you think, oh, he expounded unto them all the places concerning himself. And I thought, man, that is awesome. I'd want to be there. And then I look at your margin, and you get some of the places of where they go, but you don't get them all. And I keep wondering, where did he go? Where did he expound from? Did he expound from all of them, or did he expound from just some of them? And I guess straight from time would have to only be some places. He couldn't have expounded all of them. I mean, tonight we're going to look at the scapegoat, and I can't tell you everything about the scapegoat in one night. And I'm not sure I could tell you everything about the scapegoat at all, but every last little detail. But it'd take a lot. And so that's the point, is that they should have known that Christ was to suffer those things and to enter in his glory. And I think that the scapegoat shows this is one of the places. Surely it's one of the places you would go to show these two things. Is it the best one? Well, maybe you can have a little discussion afterwards, right? That it's the best one. It doesn't show him actually being crucified, but does show the death and resurrection part quite well. And when we get to verse 31, you look there. Isn't this us? And their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and they vanished out of their sight. And they said to one another, did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened up the scriptures? And that's really our goal tonight, brothers and sisters, isn't it? To have our hearts burn while we talk about the scriptures together, and the things certainly concerning the Jesus Christ. Now, the scapegoat is uniquely suited to showing the death and resurrection of Christ. Now, I want you to turn back to Leviticus. That's about all that we're going to use the Luke reading for. There's a little bit more of analogy there. These two on the way there. But maybe if there's some time, we'll come back to that. But there probably won't be time to come back to a little more fit into that. But tonight we just want to look at a few details, not all of them, obviously, right? Examples where we can see the types of how Jesus, the type of the scapegoat, is fulfilled by the Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, these are the types for us, ones that we can see, ones that we can emulate, ones that we can follow. These are the things that we would like to talk about tonight. And in doing so, we do our best to bring out the exhortational points, actions that we can emulate and follow. And in other words, the scapegoat for us. Now, there's three main parts that we'd like to discuss this evening around the scapegoat. And one of them is the timing and placement of it in the book of Leviticus during the Day of Atonement. So the timing and placement in the book of Leviticus. The other one is, and this may be a bit of a surprise for you, but this time of the scapegoat, the Day of Atonement, is the only festival where it's commanded in the law that you'd have a fast. Well, that's getting pretty bold, isn't it? The only place where there is commanded to be a fast. It talks about fast in other places, and in a lot of places not very favorably. But this is the only place where it's commanded that you would have a fast. And the last one, the third area that we're going to look at, is some areas where the scapegoat shares details that help us interpret what its meaning and to put into practical means with the leper and the consecration of the priest. So you have the leper, the consecration of the priest, and the scapegoat. They share some things that help us use the scapegoat for us. And so let's just go back now to start on the timing and placement of the scapegoat. Oh, a little dry. And it's a little hard to do these Zoom meetings. You get no reaction back, right? When it's face to face, which we miss all of you, is that I can see you looking back at me and you can talk a little bit back and forth, but just talking to the screen can be a little nerve-wracking. Now, what does the scapegoat? What do we mean the timing and placement? Where to start. And so we find in Leviticus chapter 16, when we're looking at it's found the scapegoat is during the Day of Atonement. And we'll come back to the timing part a little bit in a moment. Let's just look at the placement of the Day of Atonement. And the Leviticus starts out and shows out all the basic sacrifices, right? Starts out with the burnt offering, the sin offering, and then the meal offering and the trespass offering. It goes through the peace offering. It goes through all the basic sacrifices. And then it starts off with the how the service of the tabernacle would get started up. You have the consecration of the priests, and then you have the day that they started to use the tabernacle, which does not finish. They didn't finish the services that day. And we got to ask ourselves why. And maybe we'll come back to that a little bit too. So that's two things we got to come back to, right? But when we look at Leviticus chapter 16, after the failed day, the start day, which is Leviticus chapter 10, you have now all the laws of uncleanness. And I think that's part of the answer to the second part. What it failed. They were there was some uncleanness there. So then you have all the laws about uncleanness about the animals, uncleanness about childbirth, and then uncleanness within the community around ourselves with issues and leprosy, and then you have the Day of Atonement, which gets rid of all the uncleanness. It takes care of every last every last item. And it comes out with that Brother Cole had read for us, all their iniquities and all their sins and all their transgressions. This is the one day, the one time when everyone, all at once, would be made clean. So it's an incredible climax, if you will. How do we get everyone or that? And of course, that's what the scapegoat means. It means to, take away, the Aziel, to remove away. A scapegoat's only found four times in Leviticus chapter 16. But usually in the worldly part of the scapegoat, we say, oh, I need a scapegoat. And it usually means that's the person who's going to get blamed, right? And then you have a scapegoat, so you get away free without without getting caught, if you will. Somebody else takes the blame for you, but that's not the truth. That's not how the scapegoat's really supposed to work. That's how bent around. It's the almost the opposite. Well, not quite the opposite, but nobody gets away with anything during the scapegoat. I mean, there's these two goats. They're both the scapegoat. Well, in that sense, they're both the offering. One goat dies, and the other goat is lives, and I think, but both of the goats remove away the atonement part, are used in the atonement part, and so you have all this um, all this part. Well, here's the scapegoat with these two parts that Cole had read for us. If you just read from Leviticus chapter 16 with me, and you come down to where Aaron brings them, it's in verse 7. And he shall take the two goats and present them from before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. So he has both goats with them. And Aaron will cast lots upon the two goats, one lot for the Lord, and the other is the scapegoat. And Aaron will bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell, and he will offer him for a sin offering. But the goat which the lot fell to be the scapegoat, it shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement with him, and to go with him for a scapegoat into the wilderness. And so both goats are used as the one offering, and both of them are used, told about how being the sin offering and being used for the atonement at the same time. And so it's not one without the other. And it's, of course, it's for us, the main point of that is that, well, if he's having that discussion, if we're one of those two walking along the way, and they were so concerned, and the other apostles were, two other disciples were, they were sure that Jesus was the Christ. They were sure of it. Yet he died, right? They didn't expect the crucifixion part. They didn't expect the crucifixion part, and they didn't expect the resurrection part. And so this part shows forth that he would both die and live all through the same process. And so that's one of the main parts that it shows that I think that he would go to the scapegoat. Now, did he spend all that time there? Obviously not, since it says that he went to other places. Now, I think that helps with the placement part. What about the timing of Leviticus chapter 16? And this one is this is the first thing I said we'd get back to. And so when we come back to Leviticus chapter 16, if you're reading with me, and the Lord, verse 1, the Lord spake unto Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron. They had offered before the Lord and died. And so even though some time had gone past, because we know the starting of the Leviticus chapter 10 was a few months ago, and but after the death of his two sons, then you have we're told about this day of atonement. And so what happened with we turn back to Leviticus chapter 10, and we can hear it right from Aaron's mouth. It's Aaron's words himself. Leviticus chapter 10. And it's right at the it's in verse 19. There it is. Now we know what happened. They brought the wrong fire in their censer, and they were burnt. Fire came down and burnt them alive. And now we come at the end of the day. We're going to cut in at verse 16, because Moses is beside himself, right? Like this is supposed to be the start of the tabernacle. And not only is there this the death, Moses, and look at verse 16. Moses diligently sought for the goat for the sin offering, and behold, it was not burnt; it was burnt. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, which were left alive. And therefore, and he says, well, wherefore have thou not eaten the sin offering in the holy place, seeing it's most holy, and God hath given unto you to bear the iniquity of the congregation, and to make an atonement before the Lord. And so behold, the blood of it was not brought in within the holy place. You should have indeed have eaten it in the holy place, as I commanded. And so they hadn't finished it off, and he's rightly saying, look, they hadn't brought the blood into the holy place. They hadn't eaten of the sin offering. This is not how that was supposed to go. And then Aaron says in verse 19 unto Moses, behold, this day have they offered their sin offering and their burnt offerings before the Lord, and such things which have befallen me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, should it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord? And the answer is like, these things wouldn't have been accepted. You know, he couldn't do it. So it's key. The key part of everything is, would have it been accepted? And the answer is no. The answer would be no. It wasn't going to be accepted. And so though you have a failure of the part of the start on the very first day that they were to do this. Now, what it means to be accepted in the sight of the Lord, and Moses' response back is when he heard it, he was content, and it really means that it was good in Aaron's eyes. I mean, good in Moses' eyes. If I got that right, it literally said, if I would have eaten it, and everything, literally, would good be in the eyes of Yahweh? Would that be good? When Moses heard it, which is a call out to Brother Tony's exhortation, that's the Shema. When he heard it, Moses had good eyes towards Aaron. That's the literal part of that. So he accepted it. He accepted it in that sense, that they both understood. That's what it means when you look somebody in the face, right straight at them, and you tell them, "Look, this is of a truth." And so you have that. Now, why is that? I mean, I'm going to say the other part of why was it a failure at that time? It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, you probably have some. Then we all have maybe a quick answer. Now we flip over to Hebrews. I'm going to cut in at Hebrews chapter 9, but really, there's so many places in the book of Hebrews that talks about things that are specifically that would be that go hand in hand, even a direct exposition of this scapegoat and the Day of Atonement. But when we look at Hebrews chapter 9, and I'm going to cut in at verse 8. And he says, then the Holy Spirit signifying that the way into the holiest was not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle was standing. And we stop there for a second. He's talking about getting into the most holy place. You see, this what would happen on this day, as you well know, and we had read. This was the only time. That's why he started. When we get back to the timing from Leviticus chapter 16, is that Aaron was now not allowed to go into the most holy place whatever at all times, as it says, and it implies that he would have been able to go in at other times. Or maybe he'd gone in a few times between the first time Leviticus 10 and to Leviticus chapter 16, since there was a time delay there. But from now on, he'd only be able to go into the most holy place this one day, right? And that's the one time, one day. And it's the only time in which they would all their sins and all their uncleanness and all their iniquities would be made clean. And so how do you get into there? Right. And so this would be the inference is that the way into the most holy place was not yet made manifest until we saw it with Christ. For and look at Hebrews chapter 9 again, and verse 9, it was a figure of a time then present, which we offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, pertaining to his conscience. It stood for meats and drinks and divers washings and cardinal ordinances to impose on them at the time for rehabilitation. But Christ being come an high priest and of good things to come, greater and more perfect tabernacle, made not of hands, that is to say, that is not building, neither by the blood of goats or calves, but with his own blood he entered into once the holy place, having attained eternal redemption for us. So you recall that Aaron, in order to go in, he had to have a bullock for himself, and then he also had a ram, and he also had the scapegoat when he went to go in there. But Jesus went in with himself and his own blood once, and so the idea is, first of all, that Christ did that. But I think the implication is, when we think for us, is that the way to get into the most holy place, and why would you want to do that? Well, I got lots of reasons, and it'd be that, don't you want to be with God? Don't you want to sit on the mercy seat and be in the presence of the Lord? Doesn't that mean that we can be in his presence, that we can be in his fellowship, that we can be in his family, in his household, that he could be our father, that he would commune with us? Isn't that all of our goal? And the only way you can get there is through there is the way Christ did it. And for us, the only way to get there is to use Christ's pattern to get there. And we need him to do that. And it says, and the other key point is that doing the type part would not work on the conscience. It's not perfect service as pertaining to the conscience. So this part up here, the conscience, the mind part, has to be part of it. And there's the failure of Nadab and Abihu. They did not have their conscience where they were not able to come close. As soon as they came close, the fire came and took them out. And so I think there's a couple of things really there that you have to be. The type is that you have to be holy on the inside, not just holy on the outside. And so there's a couple of good things that come out of that. Now, we flip back to, we're in Hebrews. I could go. There's a couple of parts. There's lots of places in Hebrews. But while we're here, and you look at those things, look at Hebrews chapter 10. Starting at the first verse of Hebrews chapter 10. And the law, having a shadow of good things to come, was not the very image of the things, neither can those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereof perfect. For then would they not have ceased to be offered, because the worshippers once purged would have no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again of sins every year, for it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sins. And so as an introduction, it's not possible that that's it. It's a type. The substance is Christ. He did all that. He had his conscience and everything was there, and he literally went through, offered that sacrifice. Now let me go back to Leviticus chapter 16. We really should have read first a few verses there. See, when it talks about the timing and timing of that, when it says, as we said in verse 1, but you take up in verse 2, the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place, and within the veil before the mercy seat, that's the most holy place, which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear in a cloud upon them. And Aaron shall come into the holy place with a young bullock for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering. And so he had to have those sacrifices with them. In addition to, as we'll see, he has to take, excuse me, the two rams, one that's going to be offered as in a sacrifice, and its blood will be brought into the most holy place, and the other one which will be let go afterwards. And so even the order is right. First death, right? First the sufferings, then resurrection, then the glory, right? That's how that works. First the sufferings, then the glory. And so there's a really real unique part of the scapegoat that shows forth that. And I think it's helpful for us to look at those things in that way. Now, if that's the timing and the placement out of the way, and I put a check mark on that part. So, what about the Day of Atonement being the only time required for a fast? Now, you find that in Leviticus chapter 16, which Cole had read for us. And it's near at the end of chapter 16, where it gives a little bit of a summary of what everything was going on that day. We cut in at verse 29 then, in Leviticus chapter 16. He says, "And this shall be a statute forever unto you. In the 7th month and on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your souls and do no work at all, whether you be one of your own country or a stranger that sojourneth with you." And so there's kind of thought, this is the affliction of your souls, this fast, and everyone has to do it. No one, that's a Gentiles included. That's what it means by to be a stranger. Just means to be a Gentile. Even and for on the day that the priest shall make an atonement for you to cleanse you from all, that you may be clean from all your sins before the Lord. Verse 31. Excuse me, a little dry. I'll wet my whistle there. You look at verse 31. It says, "And here it shall be this day of atonement, the day that they did the scapegoat. It shall be a Sabbath of rest unto you. You shall afflict your souls by a statute forever." And so this Sabbath of rest, it really is a Sabbath of Sabbath rest. I mean, that's what it means, a Sabbathon. If I'm saying that correctly. Sometimes my pronunciation is not right, but it's the Sabbath of Sabbath rest, and even sometimes known as a Sabbath of solemn rest. Perhaps even it's the idea that this is a Sabbath, and it's the high Sabbath, for this happens not on a Sabbath day, right? This is on the 10th day, and so this is a high Sabbath day, a day of Sabbath that's not the Sabbath day, right? And it's to be an everlasting one. And there's so many other spiritual reinforcing points of this, right? Being on the 7th month and on the 10th day. Excuse me, that you will afflict your souls and do no work, and you do no fleshly work, no servile work, none of your own work, no natural work. Right? I mean, because we all know from the examples that Christ says, you can do some work on the Sabbath day. You can do God's work. My Father works, therefore I work also. And so the real part is you weren't to be doing your work. You can imagine now that when you're taking the analogy we went with before, if you want to get into the most holy place, you can't be doing your work. You can't even be thinking about your work. The fire will come down and you won't get close, because you have to be doing the Father's will and the Father's works in order to be able to get close of that. And so there's another place where this comes up. We have the summary of the festivals in Leviticus chapter 23. You want to scoot over to Leviticus chapter 23 with me, and you find it again. I said Leviticus chapter 23 is a summary of the feasts of the Lord's. Every time there's a holy convocation, as it comes up a few times. But the Day of Atonement starts at verse 26. "And the Lord spake unto Moses, also on the 10th day of the 7th month there shall be the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls of the offering made by fire unto the Lord. And you shall do no work in that same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make an atonement for you from before the Lord your God. And whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted in that same day, he shall be cut off from among his people. And whatsoever soul that doeth any work in that same day, the same soul shall I destroy from among you. You shall do no manner of work, It shall be a statute forever for in your generations in all your dwellings. It shall be the Sabbath of Sabbath rest, right? The Sabbath, Sabbath. There it is again, Sabbath, Sabbathon. And you shall afflict your souls in the ninth day of the month, even to the from even unto even, and you shall celebrate your Sabbath. And so, and you shall rest in your Sabbath. And so, everybody had to afflict their souls in this way. And the way that the idea of that, if you take the Lord's exposition, is to not do your work, no work of any kind, and any of your work of any kind. Anyone, everyone had to do it. Gentile, everyone within those borders. And of course, people that take the fasts have been used in some places not very well. I got some other places think where the Lord complains about their lack of understanding of the fasting. It's in Zechariah 8. If you can look at that later. But they always thought, it seems by the time we get to the New Testament, and they're using it as a visual sign on the outside when it was supposed to be a sign on the inside. So I want to look at a couple of examples in Matthew chapter 6. If you want to turn with me to Matthew chapter 6. And Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to cut in at verse 16. This is the Lord Jesus Christ speaking. He says, moreover, when you fast, be not as the hypocrites of a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. And verily I say, they have their reward. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to do a lot of Bible marking. And I got the link with the hypocrites in this chapter. It talks about those giving alms, and that they're making the trumpet sound, and so that they're not. He says when you verse 3, verse 2 is where the hypocrites connection is. I got a line drawn across there. But in verse 3 is when thou doest your alms, let not your left hand know what your right hand doeth. And if we were to go back to Leviticus 23, if you look back there, in the next verse, which I didn't read, which is a mistake on my part, is that you should anoint your head. It says you'll anoint your head and go with that. So while they were doing that, and so that's the other part where Christ talks about them. Other example, he says when they're fasting, no one should know. They don't have to ripped clothes and long faces and dirt on your face and whatever it was. He was saying they look like look, he's fasting. And Christ said, no, you go around with clean clothes and everything in place, and you anoint your head and you fast internally. And then you have the proper mindset. And of course, brothers and sisters, young people, this is exactly the idea that is happening when we partake of the bread and the wine. Is it not? I mean, if the bread and the wine is the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. And when he talks about in 1 Corinthians 11, before partaking of that, you know the words in verse 28, let a man examine himself, and let him eat of the bread and drink of that cup. And for he that eateth and drinketh unworthily, eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. And so this is the failure that happened with Nadab and Abihu. This is the timing of this part of the scapegoat in Leviticus chapter 16. And so I think it shows, at least shows to me that the part of how the thinking would be. And so that takes care of the fasting part, if you will. We talk about the timing and the placement, and now we got the only one is a fast. And the last section, if you will, that we're going to look at this evening is some common details between the leper, the priest being consecrated, and the scapegoat. I think there's some very telling information that help us to unlock some of the things around the scapegoat and the leper. It seems to me also, brothers and sisters, that I won't be able to go into great detail this evening, but the leper is back in the cleansing of the leper is back in Leviticus chapter 14. Sorry, you know where I'm going to be looking at. It seems to me that some of the steps even that the leper does is the same steps that happens with Aaron going into the most holy place, and it comes in stages. And so the leper finds himself in he found leprosy. He shows up, let's say and he has to go out, and he's leprous. He has to go out outside the camp, outside the thing. Then he has to come back in and be examined. He comes back in on the seventh day, and then he and gets examined, and then he's not fully restored because he offers up more things on the eighth day, and so he's fully restored after that. And so there's some parts of the stages that go is not full through, and that's what happens with this scapegoat and Aaron going into the most holy place. He goes into the tabernacle, the holy place inside. He goes in there alone. There's no man with him. It's another part that's like Christ. And then he brings the blood of his own sin offering and burnt offering, the bullock and the ram. And then he goes back out. Then he gets the blood from the goat that the lot fell on, that would be the Lord's and not the scapegoat. And then he brings that blood in, and he sprinkles that on inside the most holy place. Then they have these two these stages that they go through. So, and the other part is maybe a little more obvious, and for us is that with the cleansing of the leper, there's two birds. One dies, and the other is let go out in the open field. And so that's the only places where you have the two birds where one part of the sacrifice dies and the other part of the sacrifice lives and goes away. And so there's this connection to leprosy, and the same thing that the scapegoat cleanses the people of. And of course, what they're being cleansed of are their sins, their iniquities, their transgressions, and their uncleanness. And so leprosy is the sign of those things, is a metaphor of those things, or that of that as well. And so there's a connection there for back. The whole idea of the two birds that goes with the two goats being plural. Now, what about the priest? Well, the high priest, some connections with the high priest. Now, when the leper got come alone, he'd come alone. He'd be by himself. He was supposed to stay, unclean. No one was supposed to be around him. So he was supposed to be by himself. It's exactly what happened with the high priest Aaron when he goes in. We turn back to Leviticus chapter 16. And this becomes apparent partway through the chapter. It's like the same with all the chapters we find in the Lord. We're given some details. You're given an overview. And he goes back and goes through some more details of parts of things that happen. And then you have a summary at the end of the chapter, tells you sometimes even more details about how the whole thing goes together. And so part of the details of when, when he goes in Aaron, and we found in verse, let's try it, verse 16 is where we'll cut in, of Leviticus chapter 16. He shall make an atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel, and because of their transgressions, and because of all their sins. And so shall he do for the tabernacle of the congregation that remaineth among them in the midst of their uncleanness. And I ask myself some other questions there. What did the tabernacle do wrong? Right? Or nothing. There's other places where he makes an atonement for the altar. What did the altar do wrong? But anyway, he says in verse 17, there was no man in the tabernacle of the congregation when he goeth in to make an atonement for the holy place, until he come out. And he had made an atonement for himself and for his household and for all the congregation of Israel. So here he is inside the tabernacle, the holy place. And before he goes, nobody else is there. Nobody sees him go into the most holy place and go that until he comes back, until he has done this final part. Nobody else gets to see that. So they don't actually get to see him go through that. I imagine that the tabernacle had a high enough curtains and one thing that they didn't get to see from the outside that you would go that. Now there's some other parts, not just that he went and they go in alone. The other parts where they have in common both with the leper and with the consecration of the priest, as we talked about before. That's at the beginning of the chapter. So I'd like to turn back to that thing, and I start at verse. Excuse me. It's at verse 4, and after he has chosen that in order for Aaron to come in, verse 3, he has to have his own sin offering and his own burnt offering. He shall put on the linen coat, and he shall have the linen breeches upon his flesh, and he shall be girded with a linen girdle, and with the linen mitre shall be his attire. These are the holy garments, and therefore he shall wash his flesh with water and put them on. Then he shall be able to take the 2 goats in verse 5. Now it's kind of weird, isn't it? I mean, that's a bit different. I mean, here he is. He's the high priest. He's dressed up in his all the stuff for beautiness and holiness. And when he goes to prepare to go to these things, he says, "No, you got to take all those clothes off, wash again, right, with the washing of the water, and then I want you to put on the white. I'll say this doesn't say white, but a linen girdle, which says a white linen girdle, and a white robe." And a linen girdle to gird it, so it would, and you'd have the linen mitre over his head as well. And of course, he had to wash himself before putting those on, and then he would have that just the white linen clothes on when he would do this part for when he would go in from the holy place to the most holy place. Now, I don't know, why would he do that? Now, first of all, there's all kinds of things that that match up with it. First of all, the washing of oneself. And this is not just washing of water. Water is actually plural there, right? So it means the waters. So it means like the living water, the spring water. Well, of course, within the word itself, I mean, the whole Bible, it talks about the living water, the water that comes up out of a fountain. Even when it says, speaking of how he uses with the prophets, that they can't keep the word inside them. It springs out. All right. Even Balaam says, I wish I didn't have to speak those things, but I have to, right? They have to come out. It's like a living thing coming out of them. And so you have this being washed, a figure being washed with the living water, which also the leper would have to do. And also what happened when they consecrated the priests, they washed them thoroughly through. And here, even again, he washes again. So you have this idea, of course, of washing, and the washing of the water of the word. Let's go to, the places we talked about them. We talk about them quite a bit, but there's nothing wrong with reviewing a bit. It's in Ephesians. It's one of the places. There's many places where it comes right out and tells us that this analogy, how to use this analogy. But in Ephesians chapter 5, and it's in verse 26, and it's speaking, of course, of Christ, the whole about of Christ and the ecclesia, right? This is what Christ did with the ecclesia part. And so in verse 26, it says that he might sanctify it and cleanse it with the washing of the water of the word. And of course, in other spots where he says in John chapter 15, I'm going to go there so I don't paraphrase it badly, because I paraphrase badly sometimes. But in John chapter 15 and in verse 3, he says, and now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. And so this is the getting the uncleanness of the mind part out, having your mind in the right spot, not doing your work, afflicting your soul and everything. This is how Christ was able to offer himself up in that sense. And so he cleaned and washed himself and in that matter. And so this is one of the parts that happens, an extra washing, right? That's what I'm getting at with the scapegoat. It's not, of course, they would wash themselves before he put on all his clothes for beauty and holiness, but this is an extra washing before he goes into the most holy place. And I ask myself these other questions. So why, why these linen clothes? Well, who can dress like the high priest? Only the high priest. Who can dress in these linen clothes? Everybody, right? I mean, you follow the linen clothes. Everyone thing on throughout Scripture, and you got yourself a verse list that's going to be lots and lots and lots. So many of them, right? I saw a man in bright linen clothes where the angels come forth. Daniel was in his when Daniel was seeing it, they put in a linen coat. The linen coat in Revelation, which is the fine, she's arrayed in fine linen, which is the righteousness of the saints. And time again, you find with the not to get your garments dirty, and so like that. This is the idea that happens with thing. We have an opportunity to be just. This is what Christ did in substance, right? Not the type, but we can do it too. That's what he says. You have a wedding garment, and don't let anybody spoil their garment for that. So this is a part that we can follow along as well. And even Christ had on this. Well, when he was crucified, they took his linen garment and they offered cast lots for it. But then afterwards, he was wrapped up again in all the linen. Even it makes sure to tell us that he had the linen wrapped separately around his head. And so there's some ideas that make some connections there that I think are just incredible to go forth. There's a couple other points. I think it's been about an hour now. I had a long reading. There's a couple other small points that help with this part before we stop and we have open from discussion and we bring these three ideas together and how we can use the scapegoat for us. See, because he had to get this scapegoat, these two goats. And so it says that he shall take the two goats after he's washed himself and put on the linen coat. It's in verse 5, Leviticus chapter 16, verse 5. And he said, he shall take of the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. And so these 2 kids of the goats, they came from the congregation. And the congregation is to be is in the feminine form, and it's to be appointed. Sometimes it's used even an idea that we got appointed to be a witness, and that aspect. And it's in the feminine form because there's some times where it's used as one who's been betrothed to be the wife. And so you have this idea of the ecclesia provides out of the ecclesia comes the 2 goats that come out. And this word for I'll enunciate it wrong, Ida. I believe that there's a hyphen part in there, so it must be a guttural sound before you say that. But the first occurrence, of course, is in Exodus chapter 12, where it talks about the Passover lamb, right? And the congregation being there to witness everything that was happening, because the congregation has to witness everything that is happening at that time. And so its spiritual use is used that way. There's another interesting one where it comes into play. You'll know it as soon as I get there, but it's in Amos chapter 3. Obadiah, Jonah, Micah. One, two, Amos is before that. Amos, here we go. Amos chapter 3. You'll recall this, you'll know it as soon as I say it. It's in Amos chapter 3, verse 3. Can two walk together unless they be agreed? And the idea is that the two into one. Can two walk together unless they be agreed? So this the idea of that of the same word is used there. Now these two rams, I got some other little bullet points that you wouldn't be able to tell them apart because the two of them were supposed to be really one. And then all the it says, look, they had to be the same color, the same size, and the same value, and what that. And of course, you can't really have the full meaning of whether that until one dies first, and so let the other one go. And so you have the death first, which is this. First, you have the suffering, and then you have the resurrection, and then you have the glory. And so it'd be tough to do that with just one animal if it was actually completely destroyed. And so you have to have two in order to show forth the idea of one dies and then continues to live. And there's some other aspects around the two of them, and I'm not going to go into them during this class. Maybe we'll pick it up as a discussion. But the other part is that that it's reflective of that the fit man. Let me go back to Leviticus chapter 16. The guy who lets him go. Isn't it funny that even though the guy who lets him go, everyone's clean, right? And he lets the scapegoat go, and then when he goes to return, he has to wash himself again, right? So it's kind of the continuous washing, and the whole part of this this part that that the scapegoat also has an atonement part, not just the one that died with the blood. Is that when you pick up again to verse 20 of Leviticus chapter 16, and when he had made an end of reconciling the holy place and the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, he shall bring the live goat, and Aaron shall lay both hands on the head of the live goat, and shall confess all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions, and all their sins, and putting them on the head of the goat, he shall send them away in the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. I thought Brother Dave and I were talking about this a while back. He said, yeah, a fit man. I wonder who that man is. Or it's a man of opportunity, someone who's appropriate, somebody who's just happened to be there. It may even be, who's the man that lets that go? I mean, we have obviously the two goats represent Christ and his sacrifice. But doesn't Christ also represent the high priest who's able to go into the most holy place? And therefore, wouldn't Christ also be the guy who's able to let the bear all these this second part as well, and take them and carry them away, and so they won't come back. So this man, the fit man, he sends all these things away, and therefore this goat is left alive. And so the last part I want to leave you with, when you look with as a great exhortational part, it's in Romans chapter 12. So if you turn to Romans chapter 12 with me, and we'll finish off with this last exhortational part. And we had with us this evening, when I wanted to look at the scapegoat. We wanted to look at some main parts, the parts for us that we could use with Christ, that the scapegoat would be the type, and that Christ would be the substance, and that we could do the things spiritually, the things that Christ showed us how to do. And also the part talks about how the timing in placement of the Day of Atonement in Leviticus to getting rid of all the uncleanness, whether it's uncleanness with dealing with things outside or even inside us. And also, we talked about, what's the second part? The second, a little dry. We talked about rounding out. Oh, it's the only one that has a fast. And that's the other idea of the main part. Sorry about that. The other part is the fast. And so what are you supposed to be thinking about and doing when you're having this fast, this afflicting of your soul? And of course, the last part, the comparison of how you can see how the analogy works with the leper, the cleansing of the leper, the things that the high priest did, especially even on the consecration of the high priest, that he washed himself all fully to get prepared. And then also how these things link up with what the high priest did with the scapegoat. And so our final part, I think, will be of final exhortational part, that the scapegoat, the one who was set away and was left alive, and he was led out with a fit man. And then we think of it with us in Romans chapter 12, and we read verse 1. And I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable service. And so I think the whole part of that is that you're supposed to be a living sacrifice, which is exactly what Christ was, and exactly why the grave could not hold him. Anyway,